All right, we are live. We're back now. We're going to take a little bit of time to talk about H213, which is an act related to creating a study committee on mobile homes and mobile home parks. What I would like to do first is, I believe the way the protocol works with the, when we have a short form, is that if we wanted to work on the bill more directly, which I do, then we need to just take a straw poll in order to take it off the wall. We have a quorum here, 3, 6, 8, and Caleb, you can't vote. Anyone who's online can't vote. But all those in favor of taking H213 off the wall in order to work on the context of the bill. Please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. So we're here with Arthur Hamlin, who we met earlier this year when he introduced himself and introduced his work as the housing program coordinator for the mobile home parks in Vermont. Sandrine Kabui.
Yes.
From CVOEO, she's the mobile home program director. And Ryan Garrity, who we also met earlier this year when he came and talked about the mobile home program up at CVOEO. So, Sandrine, I appreciated your message yesterday to ask you, well, why am I calling you in? And basically, it's been 15 years since we've studied mobile home parks, to the best of my knowledge. I think my first year here in 2009, we had a report on the mobile home parks, and at the time, legislative council said, well, we do this like every 10 years or so. So it's been 14 or 15, and so much has changed since 2009. And I just wanted to pick your brains. Like, I wanted to get an idea of, first of all, and Sandrine, this is your first time in our committee this year and we'll go around and introduce ourselves before we get into conversation. But I just want to be able to get the lowdown I've had over the last couple of years through the pandemic. I've asked Jonathan Bond, who used to be the ED at HFI, and he was our main mobile home person for a couple of years during the pandemic, but he's no longer with that organization. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to come back and just start the conversation with what is the state of, for the next hour or so, what is the state of the mobile home park world? What would be the things that we would really need to focus on if we were to have a summer study committee that had 6 or 7 meetings during the summer? What do you think are the most important things that we would really have to focus on in order to start upgrading our policies? We paid some attention, we've made some investments, but I still feel like even since Tropical Storm Irene, we've seen what's happened to mobile home parks, especially say in Brattleboro, which has had the most radical change in terms of what has to happen for the Brattleboro Park to Tri-Park to stay functional, to the recent investment of funds in infrastructure, which, while it looks like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, it's not nearly enough money to get the job done in the mobile home parks. So that's what I would love to just sort of leave it there for us to have a conversation and a Q&A, and I'll start with Arthur and then go to Sandrine and Ryan. But first, let's go around the circle. I'm actually going to start with Representative Elder, who's online.
Thanks, Chair Stevens. I'm Representative Caleb Elder. I represent Bristol, Lincoln, Moncton, and Starksboro.
And Representative Tom Stevens from Waterbury.
Joe Parsons. I represent Newbury, Topsom, and Groton.
Ashley Bartley, Fairfax and Georgia.
Dennis Labonte, Linden, Sutton, Newark, Sheffield, Wheelock.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Burrows. I represent Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
And I'm Larry Labor. I represent Essex, Orleans, District 1.
I'm Mary Howard, and I represent Rutland District 6.
I'm Robin Chestnut Tangerman and represent Rutland Bennington District.
Oh, and we have one more representative on Zoom.
Representative Lamont, and I represent Lamoille, Washington, which is Morrisville, Elmore, Worcester, Woodbury, and part of Stowe.
Good to see you. All right, let's start with Arthur. I think, Arthur, I don't want to say you know what the beat of this drum is, but you do issue reports every year on the status of the mobile home parks. Is that enough for us to help make policy, or is that material that will help, that will add to the conversation? Because I think there's facts, and then there's this conversation about what we should be doing in order to support and make sure that our mobile home parks are sustainable. And actually, I would like to look at it like when you go to those conferences and there's a SWOT analysis, what are the strengths and the weaknesses and the opportunities and the threats to the near future of the mobile home parks?
All right, thank you. And you can hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, I was getting a little unstable internet notice here at home for some reason, but so just I have met many of you when I was talked to your committee earlier this year, and was worked for the department for quite a few years now in the mobile home park program. Arthur Hamlin, and I work at DHCD, primarily handling the mobile home park program, but also a few other things as well. And the report that we do, so each year we do an annual registration of all the mobile home parks in the state have to register with our department. And by mobile home park, that's defined as basically any property that someone owns that has 3 or more mobile homes or mobile home lots cited there. So there are properties that have 1 or 2 mobile homes that may be a rented lot or a rented mobile home. There's a small exemption for farm worker housing, so there may be a mobile home or a few mobile homes on a farm that are housing for farm employees. So those properties are not on our registry, but we have 238 registered mobile home parks in the state. It's roughly 7,000 individual lots within those parks. I like to kind of keep in mind or point out that in Vermont, about 1/3 of all the mobile homes in the state are in the parks, but there's about twice as many mobile homes in Vermont most of them on individually owned land, which in Vermont law are treated as basically like a house, like any other house. So I do the registration report, and I actually we do the registration list every year, and then every 3 years, I write like a little report, a mobile home parks report, and kind of look at what's changed in the last few years and what some of the trends are. And I actually this was the year to do that report. So I did just finish that report a few weeks ago. I have it on our webpage. I'd be happy to submit it to to your committee to look over. And I guess I would say it's a good starting place to kind of get a general sense of what's been going on with the parks. It's not really that detailed enough to kind of, I would say, not really build policy on, but you could look through that and you could see, we can see that the number of parks in Vermont has been gradually decreasing, basically because a few small mobile home parks seem to close every year or so. Last year there were 2 little parks. One of them was 4 lots, one of them was 3 lots. They both closed. You can see that in the last 10 years or so, when parks come up for sale, the preferred method for the residents to exercise their right is to buy the park as a resident-owned cooperative. So in the last 10 years, there are now 20 new cooperatively owned mobile home parks in the state. So not new parks, but parks that were bought by the residents. So that's another thing you can see in that report. And then I look at like how lot rent increases have changed, and you can see that we do have a rent mediation that's possible of some increases, and you can kind of look at that and you can see how the average rent increases in Vermont are basically in line with the cost of living index that's used to potentially trigger mediation. So you can kind of get trends like that. So it's sort of a snapshot of this year's registration, but also looking back a few years, but not It's not a real in-depth like statistical analysis. It's not very long. It's only about 20 pages or so of text. So I would say good to look at. Not necessarily something that you could maybe build new policies out of. It might raise some questions. You could read it and say, oh, what about, try to dig into some things and get more information, or have me, dig into the data, the registration data, to provide you other information that you might find helpful for that.
So it's data, and it's I guess it's a snapshot of the reality. Well, it's just the numbers of the park. It doesn't. Do you go into like which parks are? Does it go deep enough to say that this park is in trouble because of infrastructure, or this park is in trouble because the co-op isn't successful, or there's not enough? No?
Yeah, it's not enough information for that. And I try to just present it kind of neutrally, just kind of prevent, like, here's the information that I see that's in the registration. So yeah, it doesn't get to the level of like looking at any one individual mobile home park. I do have, there's two things that could potentially help with that a little bit. Is one of the other resources that we have on our website is it's called the risk assessment tool. It's basically an Excel spreadsheet that actually University of Vermont helped us create after Irene. So just after Tropical Storm Irene, our department did a pretty extensive report called The Viability of Mobile Home Parks, basically looking at disaster resilience and flood resilience, with different recommendations and ideas on how to, for a lot of different things, from could you build new mobile home parks or move mobile home parks, or things you could do to make parks more flood resilient. Part of that project, I guess, is this spreadsheet. And what it has on it has several different tabs. So one of them is my registration data. We also have UVM's flood data about the mobile home parks that are in flood zones and river corridors. And we also have a lot of information about permits from the Agency of Natural Resources. And the water systems and the septic systems. So that resource is really good to look at an individual park, and you can actually go to an individual park and you can say, does it have town water? Does it have town sewer? How old is the park? Have there been any water violations filed with the Water Supply Division? What's the source of the water? Is it in a flood zone? So you can get some pretty good detailed information. And you can't necessarily know from looking at that, it doesn't say, oh, this park is in bad condition or this park is a good condition, but you can at least kind of sort and filter them. And, in a way, if you can identify a park that's, it's pretty old, it doesn't have municipal water, it doesn't have any state permits, it's in a flood zone, it has a lot of vacancies, you can kind of look at the data and, that's one way to kind of look at individual parks to get a sense of what the condition might be of them. So that is there. And then just trying to think if there's, and then the viability report that we did about 10 or 11 years ago. And that one doesn't look at specific parks, but it has a lot of good ideas in it, I think.
So if we were to look at that report that we were just talking about that said, we'd have to know how to read it in order to, if there's a sort of scorecard in there to just understand by reading it that this park is in trouble. It won't say that this park is in trouble maybe, but you might be able to put the pieces together.
Yeah, we haven't done anything. We didn't want to, kind of give a grade or a score to any park, but so it is just presenting the information that we know about the infrastructure. And I can't guarantee it's 100% accurate or up to date. We do our best to update it, with the information that we get. But so it gives you some sense. But yeah, it's not. You're correct. It's not something that you could really score a park or grade a park. It's just an indicator of that a park might look like it shouldn't be in great shape because of different factors, but it might be fine. It might be very well maintained and doing fine. But so that's just some more data that you could look at potentially.
Interesting tangent.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions. Are there new parks coming into existence, or are they all legacy projects?
Mostly all legacy. There really haven't been new parks built in Vermont since probably the mid 1990s, maybe the later 1990s. So at least over 20 years. There were a few parks built. Actually, HFI, that organization Jonathan Bond was the head of a few years ago, they built Northwind Mobile Home Park in Williamstown was built in, I want to say 1992 or 3. They also built the Deepwood Mobile Home Park that's down next door to Tri-Park around the same time. And the Housing Trust in Rutland built a small new park in Rutland around the same time, the middle 1990s. There's a few other parks that have been built since then. Not any new large parks. There have been other parks that have been expanded, though, more recently, where park owners have actually added lots to existing parks, but not very many.
And is that a matter of permitting or of financing, or?
What I've been told is that the permitting situation for building a new mobile home park really isn't really any different than other kinds of housing development. Water permits, septic system permits, Act 252 or Act 250 if it's applicable, and things like that. So my understanding from like other counterparts at other state agencies is that the permits to build a new mobile home park are not really different than the permits to build something else. So my guess is it's economy, and either people don't think there's a demand for the parks, or they maybe there could be some zoning or just local opposition to building new mobile home parks in the town, or maybe maybe building something different is going to be more profitable for a developer, so they're choosing not to. I don't really know exactly.
And one more question, and recognizing that your area of expertise is parks, but you'd mentioned that about 1/3 of the mobile homes in Vermont are in parks, the rest are on private land. And do you know whether that ratio is changing at all, or is the use of mobile homes on private lands increasing, decreasing, or don't know?
I think it's about staying the same. I think it's about staying the same. Occasionally, the census has what they call their manufactured housing survey, and I can look that up, and it will tell me that about 140 or 50 new manufactured homes were sold in Vermont each year. It doesn't tell me if they went into a park or not, but it also doesn't tell me if they're just replacing an existing older mobile home or trailer that was removed. But and I occasionally can look at this, census information every 10 years. And there used to be able to kind of say how many mobile homes there were in the state. I haven't gotten updated information the last few years on that. I want to say it was probably 5 or 6 years since I sort of have a number. But I think it's kind of around the same. It's been like 22,000 mobile homes just generally in the state. I think that's kind of stayed similar.
I guess I do have one more question for all of you, and it's maybe a semantic question, but I'm just wondering if in this day of manufactured housing and panelized housing and modular housing and tiny houses, is mobile home still an accurate and the best term we have, or is that also a legacy?
May I? Would that be all right, Representative Stevens? So the correct, like the legally correct term through HUD is manufactured housing. So all of the manufactured homes are built to the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development Manufactured Housing Code. And that is defined as a manufactured housing or manufactured home. Vermont's law, some places says mobile home, like the mobile home park law that I deal with uses mobile home. There's a few other places in the state law that says manufactured home. So we generally just use them interchangeably, but to be like specifically correct, it's manufactured housing or manufactured home. But there's a lot of places in Vermont law that still say mobile home, including our rules.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And last question from me before we move to Sandrine, Arthur, and maybe this is a David Hall question, but you just touched on the fact that mobile homes, manufactured homes, live in pieces of our statutes live in at least 3 different areas of statute. One is, well, if you could just riff them off for me rather than me guessing, but basically there's this argument about, well, it was mobile, so it's an automobile. But is it real property? Is it, and then it's in the taxes. Can you just give us a quick primer on where it sits in the statute? Or is that for David?
You asked me, that might be for David Hall. But,
okay.
There's the mobile home chapter that I deal with. There's a mobile homes chapter in Title 9 that deals with the mobile home bill of sale, and there's a few other places too. So yeah, probably a David Hall question.
Yeah, and that's just, again, for us to focus on. In some way, it's not that we could necessarily change it, but just to notice that even this housing that we think is, as not as housing easily, it's really complicated. So with that, Arthur, if you could just hang out, that would be great, because we're going to do some Q&A right after that. Sandrine, welcome. If you could just give us a quick bio of your work at CVOEO and chime in, that would be great.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for having me. My name is Sandrine Kibwe. I am the director of the housing advocacy programs. That includes Vermont Tenants Mobile Home Program, the Fair Housing Project, and the new home voucher family rental assistance program. I've been with CVO for the last 12 years. It's going to be 12 years in June, my goodness. And I started with being a community service worker, working for the temporary housing front door general assistance program. And then, of course, I dived into being the associate director at the Community Action Agency. So my background is more on direct service, housing, emergency direct service. This is what my background is. But I have been working, directing the mobile home program since 2018. I actually did replace Jonathan Bond in that position, and I've been working on mobile home residents issues. This is we are the only actually mobile home resident focus program, statewide program in the state of Vermont. So we look at the residents issues, but not only that, we provide support, direct service support, and also education and referral services. Ryan would be more than happy to jump in at some point and give you more details about exactly what we do. But in the context of your question, because I do believe this is there questions, or I can just jump into what I think might.
You go.
Okay. All right. So when it comes to the study on mobile home parks, one thing that I wanted to tell the committee is that several outreach reports were produced by us. We have been, during COVID, for example, I did come in front of, I do believe it was House Journal, and then testify about the need to have a study done or a survey done during COVID on how mobile home residents were actually impacted by the pandemic, and also actually have addressed it in the sense of the immediate needs that they might have. There were a question about the stimulus money being disbursed then, and how actually that stimulus were impacting them in resolving the issues and the barriers that they were experiencing during the pandemic. And we have done that. The report was sent to you and several other entities. And the data really showed that recipients were definitely aware through TV about the pandemic and how to prevent actually themselves from being sick. But one thing was definitely noted is that the stimulus money was used to actually pay for arrears and all of those housing costs that they couldn't pay during pre-COVID. So that being done, there is also a lot of other reports that you might be able to access through us, because we have done outreach on the ground since COVID prevention measures ended. We have been since, Ryan, if I'm not mistaken, 2020 was our first actually canvassing the parks in the, we started with, of course, the Northwest region with the mobile home parks in Milton, Franklin and Grandal, let's say Franklin and Grandal, Chittenden, and Addison. This is where we started our drive there. And that effort was actually funded through the Ham Meadows Foundation. It was within our civic engagement project that really focusing on community organizing and civic engagement and participation of the community in the system change that needs to be happening when it comes to mobile homes issues and needs. So, those reports, yearly reports are available to you, but they are definitely based on what mobile home residents are actually experiencing. The other tools that we have actually to assess how residents and how mobile home communities are their living conditions is through a hotline. And I'm going to leave Ryan actually jump into that, because this is what he does every day. The hotline that we are operating really is an access for mobile home residents to actually tap into, not only see their issues, problems, find resolution, but also support through different barriers and issues, not only community issues, but also relationship issues, especially when it comes to the landlords and the residents themselves. They can be co-ops, they can be private parks, or they can be nonprofit mobile home park as well. Our program let's say that our clientele, our base clientele, are mobile home park residents, meaning that residents need to be part of a mobile home park in order for us to be able to support them. But I'm going to let Ryan jump into specifics on what we have seen so far, because when it comes to the study for this summer, this is what I actually heard, that it's the topic of a study for this summer. For us, it was a question that we had, is that what exactly that we have provided so far is missing? What information exactly would you like to get from this specific study? Because a lot of information are actually already here, or there are initiatives already being worked on to get some of the data when it comes to mobile home being implemented. So Ryan, please jump in, if you please.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Sandrine. Ryan Garrity, Mobile Home Programs resident organizer, and I was here last time with Nate Lantieri. So just to go over a little bit of our hotline, as Sandrine mentioned, we have a direct service hotline that we get calls on every day. We've seen also a large uptake in calls. Whenever a program gets launched, like the recent mobile home repair program. Back when we sent out our advocacy letter, we had gone for 700 calls since January of 2022. That came from households in over 80 parks. And we get calls of all different types. We get calls about rights. We get calls about different resources that people are looking into, and also people just needing more support. And over the last year, 2 years actually, with doing outreach, we, in tandem with our hotline, we talk with the residents throughout the whole state about issues going on in their specific community. A lot of these issues are nuanced because they have to do. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I was coughing a little bit earlier. So we deal with issues of all different types that are very nuanced, depending on the type of park they live in, the age of the park, the age of their home, the makeup of their home, and so there's all kinds of different issues that we work with our clients on, and it really when the topic of a study comes up, we, as Sandrine said, have a lot of interesting data already that we gather through our hotline and through our service work, our direct service on the ground, and also virtually, as we did a lot with the pandemic. That became a large developing thing, a part of what we had to do. And we're really happy to provide any details or answer any questions based on what we've already provided from our advocacy letter. And I'm happy to reiterate and answer any questions about the priorities that we put forward for what we're seeing on the ground and what we hear from residents. But yeah, that's generally what we do on a daily basis and throughout the year.
Yes. One thing that I will add is a mentioning of the age of a park would give you definitely a sense of what the status of that park is when it comes to the housing conditions, especially when they don't have any existing water and sewer infrastructure. As you know, a lot of money have been given to the effort to remediate to those issues, but they just started. We have been advocating for more money being put towards these issues, but it took time to come to that level of investment being done, and it's great. But we don't have at this time. We cannot tell you exactly what the impact is without waiting for those programs to be actually implemented and evaluated. So, the recommendation at this point here, if the study needs to be, a study needs to be done at this time because of all this investment being made already, maybe the money for that specific study could be actually reallocated to something mobile home related, but different, depending on based on the recommendation that we have provided into our advocacy letter for 2023.
So the idea of one of the ideas of the study for me is education.
Yes.
And I understand we could riff through the website and get some reports that may or may not have context in them to the policy work that we need to do here. I know that the policy work over the pandemic has been pretty crisis-based, but also understanding that, look, money's available. Can we get it to where we've been waiting to get it to for 10 or 15 years? But, when I'm trying to think of what part of the education is necessary for us to move forward with folks who, to understand that 21,000 or so homes are in parks, or no, what is it? Is it 21,000 homes across the state? But if, for the 7,000 that we're focusing in on the parks, is what's the status of, infrastructure? What's the status of, and by infrastructure, as you mentioned, water and sewer, for instance, is notoriously difficult in the parks, and all parks are old. Some are just older than others now. Roads, what's the status of the roads? I know we've done legislation on roads in the last 10 years or so, last 10 or 15 years or so. Like what constitutes a livable road for mobile home park residents? What else? I mean, I know that the local park in Duxbury, after it was damaged in Tropical Storm Irene, they wanted to reconfigure their park with less homes on it, but they couldn't because of Act 250 being, with not being able to use the old zoning that they were under. And so they've never really gotten back underway again. There's a few homes down there, but they couldn't change the water without a major expense, the water hookups. They couldn't reconfigure the park because it wasn't repairing it after the floods. I'm just curious, those are just some of the things that are in my mind as things that have stood out. But I guess what I'm hearing from you is that there may actually be a lot of information available that would need to be compiled still in some way that made it be useful for the policy work that we would need to move forward. Is that right?
Yes, so centralization of the information and the data is needed, that's for sure. And a central hub for information, resource and data collection is nowhere to be found. But for Arthur, with the great report that he provides, need maybe definitely more details in making sure that the policymakers have a good idea, a good sense of what exactly the situation of mobile home parks are, and what the need is at the end of the day, in order for you to move forward and make decisions on how to address those issues and move forward into improving living conditions in communities. The other portion is that I don't know if you know, but there is a possible Department of Environmental and Conservation, I think, department that will be updating the map that I think that Arthur, that you were talking about, that map that was created after Irene, that was hosted into our website. That map actually is considered to it's into consideration of being updated and more detailed in providing definitely specific information about mobile home parks, and definitely that initiative is to being able to identify mobile home parks in flood and erosion zones primarily. And see how to actually apply those existing programs through community engagement, through community outreach, for them to be able to use them all. We are part of that project as well. We were going to do the technical assistant piece of it. Hopefully, the APA grant has been approved, but we are still waiting for funding to come through in order for us to move forward with the UVM. On this project, so centralization of the data is definitely somewhat a need here. But it's not to say that all the information, or most of the information that we are able to capture on an early basis is there to be provided for sure.
The new updated flood maps and river corridor maps. Again, I'm very slightly familiar with updating, with the trouble that FEMA has had in just updating maps in general after Tropical Storm Irene. I guess there's been drafts of the different flood zones and flood areas. Will this affect once the sites are identified? Mm-hmm. And the new flood zones are overlaid, will this affect potential funding? I mean, will there be funding prevented from happening because certain parks are in certain places, or is this? Do you think that this will be some benefit in order to I mean, I know we want to build resilience. I know resiliency is the key behind it, but I'm just curious, like, what will we do with the new maps?
Yes, what would we do with the new map? Very good question. One thing that we don't know is where the older mobile homes are located. We're still doing our outreach, and I can tell you it was an endeavor in itself to try really to find information about mobile homes, all mobile homes in the state of Vermont. Information is key. When it comes to what knowing other mobile home parks and flood zone might do, one thing that we have learned, and we know that lawfully we cannot force people to move out of where they live. They definitely have, it has an educational and a relationship building with information component that is crucial for the understanding of what it means to them, their safety and their health. And it's a process. But before we can identify these communities, there is no way for us actually to target any type of initiative in order for us to do so. There is a lot of money out there that is being put towards, infill and replacement and, all of those investment that has been made, they need to be tapped into, but they need to be focused on the most vulnerable, and the one in flood and erosion zones are those that are supposed to be accessing them to it. But there is no forcing them to do so. There is definitely a community-based approach that needs to be coming with it. And that would give us actually the time. This is a very great planning tool in order for us to move forward into having these communities placed in safe and healthier spots, for sure.
Ryan, when you get phone calls in general, I mean, using the matrix that we have of, people want to move here, or Vermonters are being forced out of their homes downtown, or what the number of housing, the facets of housing of what this crisis can mean. We've heard, I think, from the agency, from the Department of Housing and Community Development, that there are X number of mobile home pads available or empty across the state, some of which may or may not be in flood zones. I guess, is there a strategy to try to help people who might be able to afford? When I think of a program that's being proposed that is proposing to bring $100,000 to a developer to help build a house with or per unit, I mean, I can buy a used mobile home for $100,000. I could probably buy a new one that's energy efficient for what, 130, 140, which is a lot of money for a lot of people. Very difficult to get mortgages for. But is there any thought about trying to find a way to work with folks who are looking for homes that they can afford to live in, which may be a mobile home, to look at some of these parks if they happen to be in areas where they want to be?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do get calls about people interested in moving into a mobile home park, and so that's always an interesting conversation, because at that current time they're not somebody that it's a client technically living in a park. They're looking to move in, and they would be a client in the future. So we have a buying guide that has a lot of information about for somebody who is looking to purchase a mobile home, or better said, manufactured home, and also move into a mobile home park in Vermont on one of those existing lots. We also have the registry that Arthur puts together every year, and we provide that to people who are interested in finding a lot. And I'd say, I mean, as far as a strategy or like an effort, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily like a strategy. We do have, as we've advocated for, and there is some existing or some current existing funding now for infill, as Sandrine mentioned, that the mobile home improvement and repair program does have considerations from some of our prior testimony that we advocated for putting in new pads or foundations for mobile homes on vacant lots. There's also money for fixing up old homes that might be abandoned or tearing them down if they're not able to be fixed up. So that way a new home could go in. There is some space in parks, and we basically work with people who are interested to try to identify where some openings could be, and also talking with them about the different types of parks, doing some education as well. So that's all stuff that we do. But it is interesting. It's limited to, and I will say, one of the, as you mentioned, the price, it is pretty high, and it has increased, just like existing. We've seen the prices, inflate over the last year or two, and also the stock. It takes a lot longer to buy a manufactured home that's new, and the stock in general is low. So this community faces all of these similar issues that we see in our general housing crisis. So
one thing that I can add to the possibility to have many of our vulnerable Vermonter considering a mobile home as affordable housing and be moved to mobile home parks. We have some requests about interests of such possibilities. One thing that you have to keep in mind is that mobile home parks are community-based housing congregations. They have their own rules and regulations. They pass through application processes, or when it comes to co-ops specifically, and when it comes to private parks and nonprofit parks, it's pretty much the same system. The stigma around mobile home or manufacturer's home is still alive. Not considered as a stick built home or as a value as a home, but definitely the interest is increased, and I think that the information and the access to more might actually tilt that. Access to affordable housing. It's depend on the way it is structured and the affordability of it. Because yes, you buy a home, it's affordable, not for most, especially people coming out of homelessness. So that there's definitely an avenue that definitely need to be designed there. But when it comes to be able to get the sense of belonging within a community, within a mobile home community, it's definitely a process. The understanding that, oh yeah, it's only poor people living in mobile homes, that would be accentuated. That's why I think that the information and the way it is presented need to be crucial in and being able to enact and move forward with that. Because usually if there is no new community being formed, the existing with the stigma and trauma are definitely not as open as you think when it comes to newcomers coming through. But it is feasible. We have seen community getting new members, and mobile homes are affordable. Specifically with whatever investment you have made right now. Access to grants was something that we have advocated for a long time because it was not affordable for most. But with access to grants, making it accessible, as homeownership is homeownership. So, that process is definitely great and appreciated, but a lot of work behind it when it comes to community building, relationship, understanding of what actually community means. And I always talk about, equity and inclusion into this. So it's a process, but it is definitely feasible.
I appreciate that a lot because it's easy to reduce it to just, oh, look, here's a couple of empty pads. Let's just put a couple of new homes on it and expect and to not even think of what that might do to the rest of the community without asking. What is the status, or how is the general status of the co-ops that have been formed over the last few years? I can't imagine that it's all smooth sailing all the time, but co-op ownership is really important. I think for people to have that ownership stake in their community. And how is it these days? It's been such a long time since I've been able to ask.
Arthur is a better place to start up with this.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yes.
Yeah, hopefully my internet keeps working all right. Yeah, so there's been, as I mentioned, there's been about 20 parks that converted to resident-owned cooperatives in about the last 10 years. They all have been working with an organization called the Cooperative Development Institute. They're just what they sound like. They develop cooperative businesses, including mobile home parks, in most of the New England states. And they have a program called New England Resident-Owned Communities. So they have several staff people who are assigned to Vermont that work with the co-ops. One of the things they do with their model is they provide ongoing technical assistance for a period of at least 10 years or for as long as there's a mortgage on the park. So in addition to helping, the legal stuff of creating a cooperative, incorporating, getting financing, buying the park, they also provide ongoing support, and they have several staff people in Vermont that work with the boards of the residents who own the parks. Several of the, particularly the larger ones, also do typically hire a professional property management company to deal with all the day-to-day stuff. They do seem to be doing fairly well. A few things that that have happened with them is, and what I've seen is typically when they have bought the park, most of them have had to do a lot rent increase right away, typically because of two things. One, deferred maintenance by the previous owner, and also just because of the real estate market and competing with outside buyers from other places sometimes so the prices for mobile home parks have really gone up quite a bit. And that usually translates into a fairly hefty lot rent increase when they buy the park. Ideally, they have not needed to really increase the rent much after that, and many of them have not increased the rent after that first time. A few of them had to do another increase. But yeah, it's not all smooth sailing. And I'm not involved in any of the day-to-day stuff, but just you can imagine, anyone who suddenly finds himself on the board of a brand new corporation owning a large real estate operation, have never done that before. So just the normal, growing pains of learning how to operate and run a mobile home park business, and hold meetings and have votes and have budgets, and interpersonal issues can certainly come up at time to time. But they do get help from CDI with some of that stuff as well, and from the mobile home program at CVOEO. Some of the smaller cooperative parks have had some struggles. There was one in particular that their well, I think they have two wells, but their well went dry, and they were in serious trouble because there was a big water outage. They had to bring in, trucks full of water, and thankfully they were able to get basically emergency assistance from the state to replace their water supply last year. I know that some of the co-ops have applied for the Healthy Homes grants through the Agency of Natural Resources. I think some of them are looking at the program that Ryan alluded to through the Manufactured Home Improvement and Repair Program, which is through our department, with ARPA money that the legislature allocated to us last year. So part of that is these infill grants to address vacant lots or abandoned mobile homes. And there are some of those in co-op parks, so they're looking for funding for that. Yeah, so they haven't. Yeah, so they're going. I think they're generally doing all right though. They're going in the right direction in Vermont, and as far as I know, anywhere else that there are cooperatively owned parks, there has never been one that has failed. So it's not easy all the time. Takes a lot of work, but I've never heard of one failing. So.
And I want to point out too that in the last 10 years or so, again, Arthur, when we had this conversation 12 or 14 years ago,
Yeah.
Co-ops were not a thing. They were a thing in New Hampshire, but they weren't really a thing in Vermont. And we relied mostly on if somebody wanted to sell their park that it would be part of a nonprofit.
Right. Yeah.
But
And
the
there's still,
nonprofits-
yeah.
The
The
nonprofits-
nonprofits still are involved. But typically if the residents are interested and able to purchase the park directly, that's good. But there have been a couple of sales recently where the residents just didn't want to do that. So a nonprofit did step up and purchase the park, specifically Roy's Mobile Home Park in Swanton was bought by HFI. And then there was a park in Randolph Center that was bought by the nonprofit in Randolph several years ago. But typically, we've kind of shifted from pretty much nonprofits buying parks that came up for sale to co-ops buying the park themselves for the most part.
Which leads to I think my last question for you all today, or at least my last question, if anybody else, please chime in. But and I want to give you an opportunity if you need to, or if you want to, but we've read plenty. Some of us have read plenty about what's going on across the country where investment groups are buying up mobile home parks. And when I've read an article, a couple different articles myself, I've always gone, oh, well, that won't happen here, or it will be harder to happen here because we have a pretty robust process for residents to have an opportunity to find another buyer or to buy it themselves. Is that, but I don't believe that we're going to be immune to it. And I'm just curious to know whether or not there's been any kind of noticeable boundaries being crossed here where we have to start really working on what will happen if a mobile home park that has anywhere, let's just say has 100 units on it or 50 units on it, that all of a sudden gets bought by someone who wants to turn it into something else. What have you all seen there?
Yeah, if I could. So I think we've definitely seen, the prices for parks has gone up, and some of that's because of pressure from potential outside buyers. There have been a few of the parks that have still, and even though we've had 20 new parks convert to cooperative ownership, more than that have been sold privately to private buyers because the residents don't always exercise their right and look into buying the park, or they're not able to reach an agreement, and those parks typically get sold to somebody else. Most of the ones that have sold have actually sold to other Vermont or nearby business owners or property owners. A few have been sold to people that own several mobile home parks, including some in other states. But to me, it doesn't seem like we haven't faced that like directly where one of these sort of big investor groups have come in and purchased parks. We do have the lot rent mediation that's available. The residents do have the right to try to buy the park first. And the other factor that I think helps Vermont is we don't have very many big parks. So of the 238 registered parks, only 12 of them have 100 lots or more. And several of those are already owned by nonprofits and cooperatives. So there's the type of a large mobile home park that some of those investors are looking to buy they're not really as available here, just generally. So that's one thing in our favor.
Great. Sean, are you okay?
Yeah, I'll say it.
Okay.
Unless you, or
Is there, Ryan and Sandrine, is there anything else you'd like to add, or if anybody has a question? I know it's late and it feels like a Monday here, and we all want to be home like you all are and having
Yeah.
some hot chocolate. But,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes, I was just about to ask about the bill, and after this discussion, what should we expect to see at this point here? One thing that we are good at the mobile home program is really to get in touch with the community and actually assess the community needs and bring it back to the legislature every year. Like I said, there are a lot of other data collected through different groups that are not necessarily being, funneled to a central point and collected per se, but author statewide report that he does every year. So depending on, and I know definitely that that those other initiatives being worked on right now, with the map being updated and information being other information or more detailed information being considered, being added to it, and we are going to continue our outreach on a yearly basis, which involve the whole state. So we try to visit the whole state mobile home parks in person through the whole state. As you know, capacity is always an issue. Investment into community-based activities, it's best to do at this point here, because we are definitely at that juncture with all the investment made already towards really improving the living conditions and the infrastructure of mobile home parks being done and implemented right now. Really focusing on the community-based needs investment. It's, I think, recommended as always. We always done that.
I would ask if you have resources for us, like I mean, I'm sure that we could invite you down here and just CVOEO, and that wouldn't be very inclusive, and it wouldn't be as broad as it needs to be. But if you could send us in the next day or so, if you have time, just to send us, like, who do you think should be in this conversation? I mean, I can think, of course, of CVOEO. I can think of DHCD. I can think of A&R, for infrastructure. I can think of, if you have a list of folks who you think might be worthwhile, because I think that this is, based on what I'm hearing anyway, is that there's so much information that could be available. It's not a question of discovery. It's a question of as you said, centralization, of being able to say, have a chapter in a study that says, here's what's going on now. But it could be a broader conversation. But I think the first piece for me in the last couple of years, talking to Jonathan and talking to Arthur, has always been, where are we today? Mm-hmm. And what does the near future hold? And so if you could send us some ideas and some thoughts on people who should be a part of this conversation, I would appreciate it.
Yes, one thing that is happening in not too long would be a stakeholder meeting hosted by the UVM groups. And I don't have the exact name of the group itself, but they've been involved with mobile homes. They are partners at this point here. Will be happening shortly on the 29th of March. This group is comprehensive. It is focusing on mobile homes, discussion about what's next. So, like I said, that there are a lot of initiatives that you might not be aware of that actually happening right now. And some more information, maybe that's where I was definitely talking about centralization and access to information in a place where is visible and accessible to all, especially the policymakers. Definitely is a good thing to have. So maybe mentioning it to that group would be something that I would do next. as a, as a point of stardom with the maybe the bill being drafted, bringing more details on what exactly you want to see and what you need to see, and focusing on that specific group to bring their input
That would be
to
great.
make it happen. Yeah.
That would be great. And so I appreciate you taking the time today, and look forward to hearing from you. And we're going to talk about this week. But if we do get something done this week, I won't consider it finished because it still has to go to the Senate and come back and whatnot. So we have time to shape it if we choose to move forward of this week. And certainly with housing bills out there, we have some room in the second half of the year to discuss it as well. So, all right. Thank you, Sandrine. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yes.
Yes,
Our
thank you for
pleasure.
having us.
Thank you, Sean, for hanging out.
Sure thing.
And we will, again, the idea that there's so much information out there, it's really clear after this conversation that it would be really nice to put it in one place again so that people can focus.
Just real briefly, and for the record, Sean Gilpin with the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm actually running to a meeting right now with a group of stakeholders to talk about an idea for a symposium after this session's over to basically do the type of SWOT analysis that you talked about with DEC, UVM, and the funding organizations. So I'm happy to send information about how that's building out. It was in part prompted by a request from Representative Kurt Taylor of Colchester, who wanted to
On mobile homes.
on mobile homes specifically.
Yeah, he came here and just, when it comes to the housing issues, symposium's probably a little bit more of a $64 word for me, but the round table, I suppose, would be, I really do think that just in housing in general, that there's this idea of so many facets that we've touched them all through the pandemic, but not in a real holistic way. We all know what the issues are, but so I've had that same thought of just like rather than having a summer study committee on housing, it's like having the round table not just as broad as possible, not just academics, not just us, not just legislators, but find out where people are we're getting bits and pieces. We'll hear from builders tomorrow on the building codes. We've heard about private versus public building, and it just would be nice to re-educate folks or to bring them to a place where we are now, because what we started talking about 10 years ago or 12 years ago, it's different now. It's not totally different, but it's different now than it was. If for no other reason, at least for mobile homes, stuff's been invested. There have been changes made, but the pressures are still there. So, for 21,000 units of affordable housing. All right, thank you all. Thanks again, everybody, and maybe we'll see you tomorrow morning.